Welcome back to another episode of the Manna Daily Podcast. Today, I am joined by Craig Harguess, who is the moderator of the Bad Roman podcast. It is a podcast that I absolutely recommend and endorse. The episodes are like potato chips. You're not getting fed from behind the pulpit, as I've said before. People are going to the podcast, and his format, if you guys are not, it's too much for the long format like I usually do with my stuff. His is perfect. It's about an hour long. You just sit back, relax, have it play in the background, and you will glean so much fruit from the conversations that he has on his platform. Craig, you are in a branch of a political perspective that is not known by too many in the Christian community of how to relook at politics. And I'd kind of like to a little bit have your testimonial story of how you kind of came to the worldview that you have, and how you think it's important in today's culture for how we do look at the political sphere of things.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words about the show and having me on your show. My political background, or so to speak, I guess, it really started back in 2000 with George Bush, the first time he ran for political office. Prior to that, I really had no interest in politics and didn't really think a whole lot of it. But I was one of those type Christians and I'm still against abortion, obviously, but that was my thing. I was against abortion. And at the time, Republicans were the only ones speaking against it. So I was like, well, I guess I'm a Republican. I didn't really know what team I was on at the time. And so I voted for George Bush mainly just for that. I didn't know anything else about what was going on. And then 9/11 happened, and 9 months into his term, and almost immediately I turned into a neoconservative, not even knowing what a neoconservative was, not understanding any of that, what was going on. I just thought, oh, we just got attacked, and we have to go get them back. We have to attack them back, and we're fighting on the side of good because we are America. And I had the mindset that America was created on the grounds to protect Israel at all costs, and Israel surrounded by their enemies. And this is all the stuff we're hearing, right? This is the stuff we're even hearing in our churches. And, and I bought into the rhetoric from George Bush where if we don't kill them over there, they're going to come kill us over here. It was all based on fear. I mean, I think a lot of people bought into it. But, that whole mindset lasted for probably till Trump. Because even during the time till 2016, I mean, I got tired of all of it. I think everybody got tired of war and all that stuff. It causes stress on your life every day, hearing about it, seeing what's going on. But I still believed in what we were doing because we had to kill them over there. Then even Obama was doing the same thing that Bush was doing, and even ramped it up. But then when Trump came along, and at the time when Trump and Ted Cruz were going back and forth with each other, I was a big Cruz supporter because he would say things like, we're going to make the sand glow over there, and I believed in stuff like that, but I was still in that mindset. But then Trump got the nomination, and there was something about the guy that I couldn't get on board with. And I just lost I was like, he's not a Republican. This guy's not, this is not right. I can't vote for him. I'll just vote third party. And I ended up voting way third party for the Constitution Party. Darrell Castle in 2016 was the last time I ever voted. And I haven't looked back. That kind of just progressed into more get into libertarian circles after that. That's really how I found Darrell Castle, because I got into libertarian circles looking for somebody else to vote for. And then they chose somebody named Gary Johnson, was not impressed with Gary Johnson. So and a lot of libertarians weren't at the time, so I chose Darrell Castle, voted last time I ever voted, and then spent a lot of time in these libertarian circles that was 2016, 2018. I moved to Memphis, and the first thing I did when I moved to Memphis was register to vote, because I still had that thought that we could change things and make things better through the state, through the system. We could change the system, and the longer I spent in these libertarian circles, I started running into anarchists. People call themselves anarchists, and my understanding of anarchists was completely different than what these people were telling me. Now, they were pretty snarky. I've talked about this on my show quite a bit. If you could find an anarchist that was not a complete snark, a total snark, and kind of pin them down, you could learn a few things from them. But I still didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense. Well, how's this going to work? How's anarchy work? But I got into kind of studying the philosophy of anarchism. And the more I studied anarchy, and this is prior to us even starting a podcast. So this is like a time period of me kind of going through my own thought process. And I was studying the philosophy of anarchy. And then I started kind of recognizing how my faith and how anarchy kind of worked together when it came to how, if you look at how Jesus interacted with the Roman Empire. Okay. And then this is before I did any study on the early church. And then when I got into like early church study, which is after I started the Bad Roman Project, because it was important to me to see how they interacted, how they engaged the Roman Empire. And if you got 400 years, almost 400 years of early church writings, history to see how they engaged the Roman Empire, it sounds a lot like anarchism to me. Now, they didn't call themselves anarchists, obviously. They didn't have to. I don't really use the phrase a whole lot myself anymore these days because it means so much to so many different people.
Right.
That the message to me is convoluted. It's confusing. So if I have to sit and spend time explaining anarchy to somebody along with my Christianity, I'm wasting everybody's time. I'd rather just explain to them why I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. That should be all you need to know when it comes to, no, I don't vote. No, I don't engage empire the way that you think I should.
Mm-hmm.
I engage empire by loving my neighbor and loving my enemy. Okay, I don't engage the empire by voting, by running for political office. I want nothing to do with the kingdoms of this world. So when I tell you I'm a Christian, when I say I'm a Christian, you should automatically understand that, unfortunately, in 2025 and well beyond 2025, we don't have that in churches. We don't have that with Christians. Your regular everyday Christian. We don't see it. They see their engagement with the state as part of their Christianity, and that's got to change because we're going backwards. Well, we should be moving forward with the love of Christ and with the teachings of Christ and moving forward with what He said. Because I am convinced that if we actually lived out the words of Christ, we would see the real change in this world that we want to see.
Agreed.
I hope that wasn't too long.
No, not at all. I'm just gonna pick your brain a little bit with, I guess, in definition. When you're saying anarchy, automatically everybody's thinking like Antifa and all this other stuff.
Right.
Could you hone in a little bit when you're talking about the early founding fathers? Because this is something, again, we do not talk about it. We talk more about our founding fathers of America, which most of them are Masons. But we don't talk too much about before we became the official Catholic Church, as they're trying to always narrate it. There was 400 years of people that were arguing against the culture, that you were converting Rome without drawing a single sword. Like 1 Peter 3:15, that they ask of the faith that's within you, because you're so counterculture. I want to know, like, what's this zeal about you? Even, confronting Paul and bringing him atop of Mars Hill. It's like, what's this philosophy? It's not a philosophy, it's a faith. But I can talk to you about it on, and it's not about forcing with a sword or with physical violence. It's literally, you almost persuaded me to be a Christian. So could you elaborate a little bit more about some of the founding fathers' resources that made you a little bit more convicted that we need to start implementing this in our modern time?
Are you familiar with Tertullian? Have you read any of his stuff?
I am, because I've tapped into some of the stuff with Mithra, connecting the Catholic Church, and he had a lot to say about that. I was like, I love this guy.
Yeah, so you probably know different things about Tertullian than I do, obviously. But one thing that stood out with Tertullian, and I always like to quote Tertullian when it comes to how they engaged the empire. Okay, so because he was probably one of the most outspoken early church fathers when it came to this topic. Now you got Origen as well. Polycarp, who, by all accounts, was taught directly by the Apostle John. So you can read some of their writings and see how they engaged the empire. But Tertullian himself said something that I like to tell Christians when it comes, especially during election cycles. He said, "We have no interest in your public meetings. The affairs of state are completely foreign to us." And I could say the affairs of state are completely foreign to us over and over and over but it still is not sticking in their brain, because this is the mentality that they had back then. The affairs of state are completely foreign to us. I will not occupy a voter's booth. These are the words of Tertullian. I will not seek office. These are the words of Tertullian. I mean, these are people who were, to me, and I'm not saying that these were perfect human beings by any means. They had their own faults. There's some things that Tertullian would talk about that I disagreed with, it's when it came to like the afterlife and stuff. But on this topic, I think he was spot on. But I think that also that I like to point these folks out too, because to me they had a better understanding than we do. They were a lot closer to the situation than we are. We're trying to work through some of our own messes that we've caused in our lives, the stuff that we've learned in the past, the stuff we've been taught in the past. We're trying to work our way out of it. They didn't have to do that. Like I said, a lot of these folks were taught either by the apostles themselves or taught by people who were taught by the apostles. So to me, discounting what they're saying is naive. It's stupid to me for people to discount what the early church was saying, because to me, they had it going on, especially with this topic. I mean, there's so much other stuff that went on that they talked about. You talked about persuading this idea that we got to persuade by the sword, but that's not how the early church operated. Mm-hmm. They persuaded the people with peace. There's evidence all through it. There's a book. It's laying on my floor right now. It says "The Christians as the Romans Saw Them." I don't know if you've heard of this book, but if you read this book and how the Romans viewed Christians at that time, it sounds a lot like state propaganda. I'm not going to lie, because if you read how they're reviewing Christians at the time, calling them sexual deviants, and it's making up all kinds of stuff about Christians, which was not true. Right. It's the same thing we see a lot today with when it comes to Christianity today as well. But at the same time, in today's day and age, some of the Christians have really kind of brought that stuff on them, because they're doing things contrary to the teachings of Christ. It's antithetical to the teachings of Christ. We're celebrating war. We're celebrating the state. We're celebrating patriotism. We're doing all this stuff that is contrary to the teachings of Christ. Tertullian said this: "Shall I carry a flag? It is a rival to Christ." Nice. Tell that to your everyday Christian today, who's got an American flag tattoo on their shoulder, or they've got something, a flag hanging from their house that's Jesus draped in an American flag. Tell that to your everyday American today, that what Tertullian said about a flag. He would say the same thing about the American flag. And if the early church walked into your church today, would they recognize that as a church? No. I'm convinced that if the early church was walking around in America right now, they would not recognize what we call church.
Absolutely. I mean, I was listening. I'm not sure who your guest was, but you were talking, pledging allegiance and stuff like that, and how sometimes I think it was, no flags but Christ, or against all flags. And I was chuckling because I was going like, yeah, there was one time I was like, I'm standing up, but I didn't put my hand over my heart. I didn't say the words. I literally was just standing there staring, going, this feels so off. And everybody was standing in masks. It was during 2020. I think it was during like a Memorial Day thing. And I was just going, no, this ain't it. What we're doing is so wrong. And it's on an altar. And I was reading something from one of Gary Wayne's books, and he was talking about an altar place, and then, things of reverence. And I'm like, we're not supposed to swear. We're not supposed to have things in reverence before God. And we're putting all of this on a podium. It just irked me, dude. And I see where you're coming from with that. And I love how Tertullian phrased that. So what was kind of the thing where, I guess the best way to phrase it, what was your turning point for saying, I can't fix it with politics, but I'd like to fix it with my character or with my own testimony? What was your turning point of turning that into the Bad Roman and saying, I got to start talking or speaking up? Because a lot of us are always taking for what just take the pastor's word for it. But we really don't, like, as men, we don't say anything ourselves, and we're all supposed to have the headship of doing so. What was your turning point of saying, I got to stand up and speak out?
Well, it's, when I first started thinking about doing a podcast, because I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts anyways, even if I'm at the gym, I'm going to listen to a podcast a lot of times, because, it keeps my mind off of what I'm actually doing, like on a treadmill or something, where I'm killing myself and I hate it. But a podcast will kind of keep my mind occupied from even thinking about it. But I was listening to, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's not a podcast anymore, but it was Anarcho-Christian. I was listening to his podcast a lot, and listening to other similar podcasts, and that was kind of shaping or framing how I was kind of starting to come into this new worldview of mine, how I viewed the state and viewed my faith. And I've always been pretty outspoken. I've always been very blunt. I've always seen things. I don't see a lot of gray in areas. Everything's really kind of black and white to me. And I know that's maybe to a fault. People can find fault in that if they want to, but I can't help it. I've talked to my mom about it. She said, "You've been like that since you were born." So it is what it is. That's just the way I think. So, but I would spend a lot of time on social media talking about this stuff, and it was just not. Social media is dumb. A lot of the times, you argue with people, with a stranger, you're debating things that are going to turn circular. You're not going anywhere. But I had a lot of things on my mind, and I was like, I like podcasts so much. Maybe I could do this, And this is in 2019, prior to COVID, when I really started thinking about it. I found a producer who could help me get everything started. She kind of handles everything as far as the publication and editing and all that stuff. But 2019, we started a Facebook page, kind of started thinking about it, getting some feelers out there, and people were kind of supporting a little bit along the way. I had one girl, she actually came up with a name for the show.
Nice.
She goes, "I think you could do this." She goes, you've got a voice for it. You've got a mind for it. She goes, "I got a name for it. We can call it the Bad Roman," which is I don't know if you can see this up here, but it says,
yes,
sometimes being a good Christian meant being a bad Roman. So we just called it the Bad Roman. And I looked up the name just to make sure nobody else was using it. Nobody was, and it stuck. And that really kind of draws people's attention to the show as well. But then 2020 hit, and we started publishing episodes in March of 2020. And when you were in an anti-state mindset like I was at the time, 2020 was an interesting time to start a podcast.
It was a perfect time.
It was a perfect time, but it was very interesting because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I was if you go listen to any of my earlier episodes from the very beginning, it sounds awful. I had some incredible guests on the show, but man, I was bad. No matter, my producer could do all she could, but no matter what, I was bad. But I think it's gotten better over time. But March of 2020 hit, and so we started talking a lot about stuff, a lot about. Then you see a lot of the stuff with churches at the time. A lot of churches were falling on their knees to do what the state said, shutting their churches down. Which to me, the churches should have been the first ones to stand up and say, "No, I don't think we will. We're going to meet on Sundays. We're going to worship. We have a king who we serve that is not of this world." And I saw that so much with pastors and churches. Now, to be fair, I've interviewed pastors on the show that did the right thing, that they kept their doors open, but then there were other churches that were holding vaccine clinics. There was a real, you could see the church and the state colliding at the same time and just really coming together where they shouldn't have been. They should have been the most separate during all that. And I think the vast majority, especially, I can't speak for churches in other countries, but especially in America, they did their congregations a disservice by not opening up and by not giving these folks a place to go during all that time, because that was a bad time for a lot of people. I told you before we started recording what happened to my brother,
right,
and that really kind of escalated things for me too. I got angrier, at the state. But that 2020 and then into 2021 was an interesting time for podcasting. And I remember when all that started. I remember saying, I think they've really screwed this up because I think it's going to wake a lot of people up to how the state behaves, how the state actually is. They could hide a lot of their things, and they could use propaganda to keep people supporting them. But all this stuff can be exposed if you just pay enough attention to it. They didn't need to really hide anything there. That people still bought into it. It was so strange to watch. I could not believe what I was seeing with Christians. Status, you kind of expect it, but by 2020, I was full-fledged, quote unquote, anarchist. I was still learning it. I was still, because in the beginning we were calling our show a Christian anarchy podcast, Christian voluntarist podcast. And like I told you earlier, I've I still use it, but I kind of shied away from it because I don't have time to explain it. But I still feel like I'm an anarchist. But I just go back to being a Christian. But yeah, that's really kind of how it all started in 2020. And then along the way, we've been doing it for 5 years now. And we've had some incredible guests. A lot of things come up along the way, with the whole Palestine stuff. And
we can get into that. Because that's another one that I'm really irked. So I heard as well, listening to your show, that you're kind of more of a pacifist anarchist, which isn't it's like, isn't that against each other? Not really. No, that's exactly what a Christian's supposed to be. I can call out evil, have no part with it, but rather expose it. At the same time, it doesn't mean I have to, swing fists and pull guns and draw swords in order to get the message across. So as well, what went down with October 7th over there, 9/11. Now, I've already done all the conspiracy background stuff, and I think it's an inside job by their own people because they literally called it their own 9/11. I was like, well, fitting. But listening to your stuff, it like, again, the episode that I shared, absolutely loved what Sizer was saying. And I think there's kind of like this cognitive dissonance is that people don't want to believe, as you've said a lot of times, I'm always like, yes, exactly. They don't want to believe outside of what Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson or fill in the blank or whatever the pulpit guy tells them. They just want cookie cutter this, support God's chosen people, make as much money as I can, make America great again, and then I get raptured out before things get really bad. And I'm like, no, if that is your mindset, you have no idea what spiritual warfare is. So when it came down to what went down over there, what was the thought process, or what was it that made you go, I'm not buying it like I did during 9/11 on this time round? What was the thing that kind of woke you up?
Man, well, I think it had a lot to do with my really understanding how the state operates.
Okay.
It's an understanding I didn't have before. The fact that when you really kind of go and read the history of what's going on there with Palestine and Israel, we're not being told the truth about it. First of all, there's a longer history. People will go back to October 7th. There was so much more going on prior to that, But just the fact that the images that were coming across. Now, and I have to say this every time, and I don't know why I have to explain this because I've been called anti-Semitic lately. I've been called woke. I've been called a leftist. I've been called all kinds of things recently because of my stance on this. But this is not me supporting Hamas by any means either. I believe that they're a terrorist organization as well, just like the Israeli government is a terrorist organization. The United States government is a terrorist organization. Now, and I don't feel like I should have to explain that to people, but when I was seeing images come across of what was happening in Gaza, people kept saying self-defense. I said, this is not self-defense. This is a slaughter. This is a slaughter. This is genocide. And then they would go back to October 7th, and I said, yes, that's terrible what Hamas did. Whatever happened to Israel, that's terrible. But it does not justify what's happening now. You have Israeli snipers shooting 2-year-olds as they're fleeing the rubble in the head. This is picking them apart. And these people they're Christian Palestinians that are being killed by Israelis. And you as a Christian are celebrating this. These are your brothers and sisters in Christ. They may not look like you, but they are still created by the same God that you were created by.
Right.
And you're celebrating this. What woke me up is what I was taught in my Southern Baptist churches about Israel, about dispensationalism. What woke me up was the Israel, the Bible is not the nation state of Israel.
1,000%.
when you understand that, and I told Sidra this on the show because we talked about this quite a bit, and I told him, I said, once I understood that, and I said once Christians start understanding that they are not the same thing, it changes everything. It changes the way you look at what's going on over there. And the problem is you've got too many Christians that can't see it. They see Israel in the Bible, they see Netanyahu. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd, and I'm losing patience with a lot of them too. I try to, man, I try to pull my punches sometimes because you got to come at them as a loving mate, lovingly, I guess. But sometimes, man, I'm losing my patience with them because people are dying. Real people are dying because you were supporting. I do believe that this absurd understanding of dispensationalism is the root cause of what's going on, because you have people like Hagee going to the White House. And they got their voice in the president's ear talking about that. They're pushing this agenda forward, for this Israeli agenda forward. And everything we've seen this week with Trump and Netanyahu, it's getting worse. I won't, man, the worst thing you can do when you first wake up, like I said, I'll sleep during the day because I work overnight. Before this show, I woke up, and I probably like you too. If you have a podcast, it's fairly popular. You're going to wake up to messages. You're going to wake up to emails that you got. Some of the stuff you got to respond to. You'll get to later, however it works.
Yeah. Yep.
I did all that, but then I started scrolling Facebook, and that was terrible because my mind has not completely woke up yet. One of the first posts I saw, this girl is a diehard Trump supporter. She defends him to the teeth, no matter what, and she was praising him for what he's talking about doing in Gaza right now. She goes, at least he's talking about doing something. I didn't go say nothing because I don't have time. At least he's talking about cleaning up the mess. And y'all are whining about it. I put my phone down. I was like, I got a podcast to go do. I don't have time for this. But this is the absurdity that we're seeing with Christians, Americanized Christians these days when it comes to this. And I don't know where it comes from. I think a lot of it comes from behind the pulpit. It did for me. And I don't want to accuse every pastor doing that, but I saw it a lot in my time in church. And we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started recording about not going to church. I don't spend a lot of time in churches.
Yeah.
I can't.
It's no longer about the building, it's about the body. And I think that's what a lot of us are kind of going, ecclesia, we're done with the buildings. We're ready. Yeah. We have the electorate. We're irked. And I totally hear you. What you're saying is like, there was one message I heard, and I literally I looked down and I was making a fist. And I was going, okay, that's not Christian, but why am I doing this? Because everything he said, I'm like, I could debunk that. I literally wanted to get up from the pew and go up there and say, I'm debating you right now.
Yeah.
And again, I think you're right. There's certain people we have to it's not worth it. It's not worth the confrontation, as Paul once sometimes said. And other times it's like, no, I'm the only advocate in the room for Christ, and I'm going to say my say. And I have to get stoned like Stephen, then so be it. But I'm going to call it out as I see it. And I've said before, I think dispensationalism is Zionism for Gentiles. And they don't get it. Yeah. Because you literally are programmed with your whole manifest destiny yourself. That when you see it over there, you're over there like, yeah, same thing. I don't see a problem here. Dude, and I'm laughing because, it's like you said, or you're a liberal. I'm like, no, because here's the thing. I've always taken a test, and this is even before, with politics, stuff like that, I've always been dead center. So I understand a lot of the humanity aspects of liberals without going, blue-haired and all this stuff. But I'm also rational enough to go, is there a better way to resolve this without our government? And libertarian sentiments, not in political party affiliation, just sentiments of we need less of that, and we need to start humanely seeing that. So what would you say? What would you say for Christians that claim that they're Christian, but they've lost all sense of humanity, which is biblical, and that we're supposed to be the peacemakers, that we're supposed to be the interceders, and advocating for the widows and the homeless? What would you say to them if you had to surmise it? Of you can't confront them, but let's say if you had to have a message for them, how would you phrase it?
I would first encourage them to get back to Jesus, because I think they've lost their way to Jesus. I think that I hesitate to not call them Christians, to say that they're not Christians. I hesitate because I think everybody throughout their life has fallen away in some fashion, and they work their way back. I think some maybe more than others, but I think the easiest way to approach somebody like this is just with the words of Jesus, but that doesn't always work either. I mean, I've been doing it for 5 years now with the podcast. I can have these conversations online with people. To me, is silly. I'll do it for a little bit, but I'll lose interest if the conversations turn circular. I think the best route is your face-to-face interactions with your neighbor, with people, your coworkers and stuff like that. Even people, if you're going to church, talk to people at church about it, but just to encourage them to read the Sermon on the Mount. Read the Sermon on the Mount. Let's just start there. I say that a lot. I've been saying that a lot lately. Let's start with the Sermon on the Mount and go from there and see what happens. If you could take the words of Jesus and see how he instructed us to behave, follow his teachings, I think I'm convinced that it will change this world. And I think the easiest way is just get back to Jesus. Now, when I say easiest, I don't think it's always the easiest too, especially when you kind of fallen off so far off that you can't see. Your eyes are blinded. What is the phrase I'm looking for? You need the scales to fall off.
Yeah, like Paul. It's like, know a lot, but I'm going to blind you for a little bit until you wake up to what I need you to understand.
And there's going to be one thing that's going to wake you up.
Yeah.
But when you see it, you need to keep going because there's more. You can't just stop there. You've got to keep going. Okay, what was I blinded to? And once you realize that you were blinded to this one thing, well, what else was I blinded to?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people really need to start thinking for themselves. Quit going to church and listening to a pastor and taking his word, his message as the word of God, and go check it out yourself.
Yeah.
Do your own research, do your own reading, do your own history study on where this stuff came from. I encourage people all the time to go read the early church stuff.
Yeah.
If you read the early church stuff, it changed everything for me, or at least for me, it solidified what I was already starting to see, what I was already starting to think. But because I was seeing it in the Bible, I was seeing it with the words of Christ, I was seeing it with the apostles. But then there's more, and there's so much more information past the Bible that we can read when it comes to these early church fathers. And then there's really no going back. Once the scales have fallen off, and once you see the truth for what it is, once you see how the state operates, once you see how Christianity should operate, it changes. And once you see it, it's over. I have not met anybody in these circles so far. Like I said, we've been doing it for a little over 5 years, or almost 5 years now, I should say. Anybody that's come to this conclusion, I've not seen one person turn around and say, you know what? I'm going back into my status. I'm going back into it. But I've seen a couple people here recently with Trump do it, but they admit they never really believed it in the beginning. But anybody's come full force into this no king but Christ mantra that we spout off on the Bad Roman podcast all the time. No king but Christ. Once they understand it for what it is, they're there. You can't turn around. And I do a lot of farmers markets with the salsa that I'm selling, and I get to talk to people out there and get to talk to other Christians about this. When you talk about no king but Christ, and they understand it, they're just not hearing it in their churches. And I was talking to a guy. He started his own home church. This is getting to church. This is really what I'm interested in, is some kind of home church thing where people can kind of gather at the house and we can fellowship. Let's have some dinner. Let's barbecue. And if you want to sing, you can sing. I'm not much of a singer. I'm terrible at it. But if you want to sing, I'll sit and listen. But I was talking to him about some of this stuff, and the conversation led to this no king but Christ. And he gets it. It's the first pastor that I've talked to in a long time that just really understands what it means. He said that some people were attending their home church, and she came into, I think it was Trump's first. I don't know if it was Trump's, maybe it's 2020, whenever he ran against Biden the first time. And he said she was all about Trump, and he kind of talked to her about it. And she ended up leaving the church because it was all in her head about Trump. And sent by God and all this stuff. And she thought he was being antichrist. And she just left the church, left their home church because of it. And that's just the kind of the mentality that we're seeing these days, and it's got to stop. We've got to get back to Jesus. I think I just went all over the place with your question. I apologize.
No, not at all. And if necessary, I'll mop it up for you.
Thank you.
But dude, like, yeah, and that's kind of the stuff I'm tapping into, is that we are doing as above, so below. We're creating God in our own image. And this is what people are not understanding, is we've become very Pharisaic in our culture.
Yeah.
God, like, Christ, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. The crowd, again, listening to the leaders, are not thinking for themselves. Just do it. We'll get, we'll shave off somewhat, this much from your sacrifices for next week. Okay. People aren't getting it, is that they are manipulating you, and because you choose to participate in the game, you can't blame them when the magician or soothsayer fools you, because that's how they get this is how they operate. And I'm not seeing in the pulpit, I'm not seeing pastors teaching us how we're supposed to disciple others. It's come in, sit down, do the pew. It's like Diet Coke Catholicism. There is no oof. Like, you can cry after a sermon, sure, but I'm talking about when you're done, do you go out and live it all through the week? And I think a lot of Christians, they don't know how to do that, and this is why they get this self-righteous mentality of, well, it's not my fault they didn't come to church and hear the pastor speak, because, that's going to be on them. It's going to suck when the end times happens, but I got my rapture ticket, the golden ticket to heaven. And it becomes like this little, puffed up pride.
Yeah.
You're in the faith because it sounds good. I get out before it gets bad because I trust Jesus. But are you living the word? The word is alive. It was resurrected. It is the word made flesh. And because Christians do not understand who Christ was, I truly wonder, are you using my adjective, as you said? Sometimes I don't want to use a word because you're making me look bad when I tell other people I am a Christian. It's like, no, you're a churchian. You're going through the rituals and traditions of men, but you're not living it. So, reel that back. Would you mind explaining what exactly is statism? Because again, you're saying a word, but break it down, at least in your interpretation of it, and why you stand against it specifically. Like, break it down from a Christian perspective. This is what that definition means.
Oh, it's a belief from a Christian perspective. That's easy. It's a belief in authority other than Christ. It's a belief in authority that we know by reading the Bible was given over to Satan.
Yeah.
And if we know that the authority was given over to Satan, why in the world would a Christian want to participate in it? It's just a belief in authority. I mean, even a non-Christian view, it's belief in authority. That what if I don't believe in that authority? What if I don't believe it? You don't have the right to put me under their rule because you believe in something and believe in their authority. But I think, the Christian perspective is a belief in authority other than Christ. To me, that's the simplest way to explain it. I don't really know how else to explain it. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does, because the definition of antichrist is substitute. So if you're putting something before Christ, it's not just the Pope, it's anything. If it's a flag, a philosophy, an ideology,
right.
a political institution, politician, that is statism. That is what we're not supposed to be part of.
It's a religion all unto itself too. I don't know
Yes.
if you've seen it that way or not, but it
Oh,
seems
dude. Yes. I have a buddy that's an ex-veteran, and he listens to Daily Wire like it's like, it's sickening, dude. I'm like, he doesn't know what Hezbollah is. I'm like, that's propaganda, and you know where he comes from, that guy. You also know where propaganda you comes from, PragerU. I'm like, because, again, and what is propaganda? It's only listening to the narrative and perspective of the world as you want to see it. It's not saying, I'm willing to hear the other side, even if I might have a little bit of a gripe. It's like, no, I have to force myself to listen to it, because if I don't understand both sides, you're only half informed. So
I was guilty of that. I was guilty of that for sure.
Yes, a lot of people are, and I like how you're bringing out terms for people to start digging into, because I think that's a thing, is that, for instance, like in my profile, it'll say like conservative, libertarian, Christocrat, contrarian. And somebody sees libertarian, they automatically go, oh, that's such a joke. in sentiments, not political party. But again,
Yeah.
let's break that down. But people are jumping the ball because identity politics is a real thing. You voted for that guy, so it honestly means I hate the other side or whatever. It's like, no, I hate all y'all. And everybody starts throwing rocks at you.
I'm an equal opportunity offender of the state.
Yes.
I don't care what
Yes.
side you come from. I mean, I don't even use the term libertarian anymore because it's associated with a political party. I mean,
yeah, well, you're right. That's why I say sentiments. I always emphasize that.
right.
And with capping that with Joshua's phrase, but like, choose you which God you will serve, but as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Because ultimately, and again, the Christocrat aspect, I don't think you should have political office or go full on Christian nationalist. What I'm saying, as men, we should have a say at the powwow, and I represent myself. I don't send somebody to speak for me unless it's my elder and I'm speaking on behalf of my dad because he's a cripple and he can't come to speak at the lodge. Agorist, in a sense.
Right.
I come and talk, and this is why they got rid of the tribes. Because, they're going to be a problem, because what do we want everybody to trust us? Trust us. We have the solution. We have the solution. No. So where do I want to go with this? I love picking your brain because you're somebody that actually gets where this, a lot of this stuff is coming from. So when you were listening to Anarcho-Christian, what was some elements there that you really appreciated and you decided to implement, as opposed to just using the adjective like to describe yourself of what is anarchy? What was it putting some of this stuff into practice, and what was some elements there that you were like, yeah, and I don't see them talking about this in church?
Well, I think what was so fascinating to me in the beginning, because my biggest question when I first started getting into those circles and listening to what they were saying is I wanted proof of this in the Bible.
Right.
It's been there. I've just never seen it, or I've glossed over it. If I've read it, I didn't understand it to be what it was. And my eyes were open to a lot of things once I kind of walked away from my statist mentality. It let me see things more clearly. So when I started listening to his podcast specifically, and I would talk to him, he and I become friends over the years now too. And I would message him. I said, I need some scripture. I need some scripture to go over to understand where this idea comes from, Christian anarchy. I want to know where you're coming at with this, but where is it in the Bible? The first thing that I was directed to was 1 Samuel 8.
Yes.
How many times have I read 1 Samuel 8 and never seen what 1 Samuel 8 was saying? Because it's still happening today.
Yes.
So then it just kind of sends you down a rabbit trail of other things in the Bible and how there's Christian anarchy all through it, or just Christianity all through it. But yeah, 1 Samuel 8 was the first thing that I was sent to. Read it again, and once I was I don't know how many times I read it, but I could not quit telling people about it. And I'm like, have y'all seen this? This is the book that we're reading, the same book. Have you read this? I've read it. I've never seen it like I'm seeing it now. Where did that come from? Why did I not see this before? Why is my preacher not talking about this? Why am I not hearing this from other Christians?
Yeah.
Why are we not talking about this every election cycle? And you want to know how far down I went with this? And I tell people this too. I explain it to them this is how I see this. I believe voting is a sin. This is what 1 Samuel 8 led me to. Because if in 1 Samuel 8 it says that it's a rejection of God, God viewed that as a rejection of him.
Yeah. When
Israel demanded another king. And if rejection of God is not a sin, then I do not know what a sin is. And I try to, this is where Craig's at. I try to tell people this is where Craig's at with it. This is what I believe, that I believe voting is a sin. And I think it's satanic. I'll even go a little further with it. I think
Anton LaVey confirmed it. He said, for those who think that ritual magic and politics don't intermix, and he's talking about the Masons with degrees, and like, yeah, so if the founder of the Church of Satan is confirming this, I'll take his word for it. Not everything else, but I mean, if he's giving confirmation that politics is part of a satanic ritual, yeah. And I think I saw for this year's election, was it like 32 million Christians decided not to participate?
Dude, I was celebrating.
Dude, yeah, like, hallelujah, people are getting it. We're done.
I was sharing that all over social media. I was like, this is finally.
Yes.
Have you seen the Ron Paul gif? It's happening. I was sharing it all over. It's happening. Christians are starting to wake. Now, it might have had a lot to do with the two candidates, too.
Right.
They're like, we're not even going to hold our nose and vote for either one of them. And hopefully there's more to it than that. But the fact that 32 million Christians set out and didn't vote. And I remember posting about it. One of these guys that was telling me that he's now a Trump supporter. He became a Trump supporter during the first assassination attempt because he was so proud. It was so patriotic how Trump stood up and said, fight, fight, or whatever he said. And I'm like, that's a pretty strange way to go back into statism, but okay.
Right.
But I was sharing the fact that 32 million Christians were talking about not voting and setting this election out. He goes, well, that just means that they don't care about this country. They don't care about I don't even know what he said. It was a bunch of convoluted garbage that a bunch of statists say. But I'm like, no, I said, this is wonderful. But because I don't know how you feel about your project, and I know how I feel about mine. Like I said, we've been doing it for almost 5 years now. But you get to a point where you're like, man, am I wasting my time? Because you see it in during election cycles. It kind of gets a little depressing. You're seeing Christians getting all excited about this and that. And I'm like, man, we've been doing this for 5 years. Are we reaching people? And I know we are because I get the messages, I get the emails.
Yes.
I know we're talking to people who we like to refer to as the remnant, people who don't know how to ask the questions. They don't know how to go about this, but they're hearing this message that they've never heard before. And I'm not saying I'm anything special because I'm not, but they appreciate the work we're doing because they're hearing things that they haven't heard before. But when we see this at 32 million Christians I'm not saying I've had 32 million listeners to the Bad Roman podcast. I know that. I'm not saying that at all. Right. But what I'm saying is you see that, oh, okay, there's still some hope. We could keep moving forward with this message of no king but Christ. We could keep doing what we're doing because it's even if these 32 million people haven't heard of the Bad Roman podcast or the Manna Daily podcast, they're hearing something that's making them wake up. Wherever that message comes from, man, let's go. I'm all about it. Let's go. And when I saw 32 million people said, no, we're not doing this, let's go. It gave me a little more energy. I was like, okay, I got to try.
I literally posted the Hallelujah chorus in my stories when I saw it because I was like, God, like that's what I keep telling people, and like yourself, I'm getting DMs, Ireland, somewhere over in the Middle East, somewhere in Australia, and I'm just like, God, it's reaching people. Like I was falling away from Christ, or I was kind of cynical, and they're now asking me like, how do I start implementing Christ again? And again, that's part of the reason why I want somebody like yourself on, because I get questions like that. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? It's just stand up. Just stand. If you want to stand out, first you got to stand up, and that's one of the biggest things is pulling the weeds of what you formerly knew and renewing the mind, as Paul said. I die to self daily. Examine if you are in the faith. This is all the New Testament. A guy that knew his Torah, and there's a reason God said, I want you specifically, Paul, because nobody's going to believe you at first. But if they see the transformation of a guy like you, imagine the effect that's going to have on folks. And this is, again, in politics. Well, you used to be a diehard neoconservative. Yeah, now I'm running something that's saying I'm done with that. I've done a full 180 for Christ in the kingdom of heaven.
Right. Yeah, and I heard you. I can't remember what show you were on. I was kind of listening to some of the stuff you've been on to kind of prepare for this, and for you coming on my show too. But you said something about. I'm gonna butcher this, but it's something about when I became a Christian, I lost my friends, but when I started reading the Bible, I lost my Christian friends or something. I apologize for butchering that, but I was like, that's it. That's spot on because that's happened to me. Yes. I mean, I've lost friends over this who are not necessarily Christian, and I've lost Christian friends who, when you point to the Bible, when it's saying what Jesus was saying, you get called woke, you get called anti-Semitic, you get called all kinds of different things. And so I heard you say that on, I can't remember what show you were on, but
that was like, that's it. I know that, yeah.
And it's true. And anybody that's listening to this right now, like what you were just saying, the messages you're getting, if you're thinking about doing this, I encourage people all the time to start a podcast, write a blog, do something. You may not be Joe Rogan or whatever, but you could at least reach somebody out there, part of the remnant that we're not reaching. That that they're gonna need to hear this conversation. They're gonna need your perspective on this, and know this too. When you put yourself out there, you are putting yourself out there.
You're a target,
because not everything that you get in messaging is going to be polite.
Yeah, that's what death threats, dude. I was like, good grief, relax.
Calm down.
It's like,
It's just
and,
it's a podcast.
well, yeah, and this is the thing, dude. I said, and even if you feel like you don't have a voice, you're like, Moses, I can't speak. Sponsor an errand. Well, I don't have a lot of money. $2 a month. You'd be surprised if 400 people did. It's like that's half the income. So again, somebody like yourself. For me, it's like I can only do part time. So now I can put more effort into research and getting content out there. And
Right.
it's like I don't think people realize that, but this is what the early church did. And again, it wasn't about making money. It was, all right, Paul, you're going on a mission. How much do you need? You know what? I'm not going to ask that. Here, take it. And then, they'd come and collect and continue on their way. Why? Because it was about the message continuing and people being converted. And that's what a lot of people don't get. What we're doing now is this whole tithing thing. And we're throwing it to people that are of the congregation of the dead.
Yeah.
God's not going to come and collect buildings, people.
Right.
He's here to collect his bride. And again, Revelation 18:23, very potent verse, especially after 2020 in this golden age AI, not going to say the word, but I'm over here like what was it? The voice of the groom, which is Christ or the word, and the bridesmaids was heard no longer in thee, for thy rich men of the earth, all the nations were deceived by their pharmakia. No, you're crazy. No, I'm like, no, it's right there. Big pharma. Like, okay. And this is the thing, because you're not listening to us. I have to wonder if you're a sleeping bridesmaid, if you're still stuck in the statism or the things of this world. I'm like, it's all going to burn. You want it to burn? Because I'm going to eternity.
Yeah.
I don't
What do
really
I care?
care.
Yeah, I was having this conversation, something similar too. He goes, and he's not a Christian. I was on his podcast yesterday, the Toward Anarchy podcast, and he said, he goes, knowing what you know, the message that you're talking about, I'm butchering what he was saying, but he goes, paraphrasing, he said, it seems like a tall task. About just the teachings of Christ. He goes, because you still have people out there like Fauci and Bill Gates and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah. I said, those people exist. I said, Christians are very aware that bad actors exist. we could read early church history and see that bad actors have always existed. Amen. They killed Jesus. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, but as a Christian, knowing that people like Fauci exist or Bill Gates exist, I don't care, because I know my ending. I know where I'm going to end up. I'm not saying this is not being an advocate for dying. I'm not running out there seeking to die today either. But in the end, when I do know that I'm going to die at some point, I'm not too concerned about it, because I know where I'm going. I know I know who wins in the end. Let me put it that way. Yes. And it's not Fauci and it's not Bill Gates.
I think the Psalms or Proverbs says the rich men, plot, but God wins in the end. Paraphrasing again, but yeah, that's something that gives me solace. And I was also telling somebody, I said, it really hit me one day. I says, religious people are willing to kill for what they believe in, whereas a Christian is willing to die for what they believe in. And this is I immediately was thinking of Peter drawing the sword. He's like, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Like, I'm not advocating, like, if your family's being attacked, yes, you have the right to defend yourself. If the Antichrist there, he says he makes war against the saints. Bring it. I would rather fight for what I believe in. If I know this is the last, swinging, I'd rather go down swinging, because I know nobody else wants to hear the message. So I'll go out swinging like Samson. I don't really care. And I think too many Christians, they're scared. They would rather run from the fight as opposed to standing and understanding this is spiritual warfare. We wrestle not against flesh and blood.
They've been conditioned to depend on their pastor. They've been conditioned to depend on the state.
Yes.
And they find comfort in their slavery. I call statism a lot. All it is slavery, and you're doing it to yourself.
Yeah,
you're asking to be a slave.
Larkin Rose, the Jones Plantation dude. They always censor it.
I've had him on the show a couple of times.
Yes, I've loved that conversation. I was like, "Ooh, I could fill in a blank here for him," because there's like a puzzle piece. I'm like, I love the cynic. Yeah. When they're a healthy cynic, because it's like, I've observed this within Christianity. I'm over here like, you're so close, because I could answer that question, because Christ, yes, he did say it, and I'll share it when we do our episode. But it's like, that's the saddest part, is when these cynics are seeing Christians and that makes them leave from wanting to pursue the faith because they're seeing the hypocrisy of like, oh, so you stand with things going on in Gaza? Oh, so you stand with the whatever going on with the state? Because we look bad when we mingle with things of this world, whereas if we're set apart, suddenly that prompts people to go, why are you always countercultural? Can't you just go with the flow? No, I'm a salmon. I go the other way.
You don't know me very well.
Right.
You're just going to go with the flow.
Right. And it's like, no, that's, as a Christian, it's always saying, you know what? I'm no longer going with the current. I'm going to go with Christ. And that's,
when we see something wrong, you're going to ask a question. If I see something wrong, and I'm not speaking for you or anybody else, but if I see something wrong, and it happens everywhere I go, and it's not just on this. I mean, if I see something that doesn't make sense, I get curious.
right.
And
right.
when I find we get more curious, and then I find out this is wrong, I'm going to ask more questions. Well, why are we doing this if this is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously wrong. Why are we doing it? So then it leads me into a lot of conversations when it comes to Christianity and the state, and especially with just one-on-one conversations with people in real life, not online. Yeah. You know, it's fantastic. To me, those are my favorite conversations, when I can look somebody in the eye, shake their hands. Let's talk about this. You know, and if I'm wrong, I mean, I'll be the first one to admit if I've got something wrong. I don't have all this figured out. I'm still learning things today. You know, that's one thing about my show that I love so much, is getting people on the show who are way smarter than me that I can learn something from. And then what I've learned from these folks, I can share it with other people.
Right. Right. And that's the thing. You're kind of like a depot or a lighthouse. People stop in for a second, get a nice warm meal, and you send them on their way. Yeah. But you might have planted a seed, and that's the parable of the sower. Some people's hearts aren't ready to hear what you have to say at that time, but there might be something down the line that you said something, or an action you did makes them go, Yeah. And I think you're right, dude. People are afraid to question the system of what's always been. And that's been since Socrates. He's making the young men ask the question, why? It's Socrates to Christ. Yeah. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. What does that mean?
I love that first, because I can hit with that every time. It happens during election cycles.
Yes.
Like, we're not supposed to be participating in this. Well, render unto Caesar what is Caesar. And I'm like, so are you telling me that by you going and voting, you're giving yourself to Caesar?
Right.
And what belongs to God? Are you telling me you don't belong to God? What's going on here? You can't use that portion of scripture to defend your statism, to defend you going and voting, defend you running for political office. Right. You just admitted to me that you're giving yourself to Caesar.
Yes.
Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. You just gave yourself to Caesar. And unto God what is God's.
Right.
You just told me you don't belong to God. Or their jaws drop. They don't know how to answer it.
Yeah. And even in the monetary sense, it's over here going, in God we trust. Why is that on our money? What Christ said, lay not your treasures and things of this earth. So it's over here, they've equated, I'm going to create God in my own image. It's about materialism, because the prosperity gospel, whether you realize it or not, it is connected to statism. It is connected to patriotism. It is connected to government. And a Christian should be at a moment's notice saying, I might have it, but I'm willing to cut it off in a second if the government's telling me this is the only option, or I have to submit to this thing. And he's like, no, that's what you have monetarily for this time, like, taxes or whatever. Do it. But don't forget your spiritual priorities first and foremost to God. And what is he telling the Pharisees? Because they're over here saying we merge the two. He's over here like, oh, crap. It's like, yeah, I'm calling you guys out because this is what you do. You mix things, and we're supposed to be set apart.
And Jesus had no interest in, Jesus didn't even care about money either. I mean, when he told him you go find a coin in the mouth of a fish, it didn't mean anything to him.
Yes.
It didn't mean anything to him. And so that portion of script, I'm trying to find somebody. I think I've got somebody. I'm trying to find somebody to come on the show to talk about render under Caesar. I want to drop it around.
Yeah.
Tax season and all that stuff. But because it's just such a stupid conversation to me anymore that Christians use. They say it and don't know what it means.
Yes. I would love to do that if you ever need help.
We can do it. We can set that up.
We connected it to connect me to Nimrod's son who created coinage. Yeah, I was over here going, wow, that's
Yeah, we could certainly talk about that. I know we're going to
sure,
get you
sure.
on, soon. Maybe we'll do a couple podcasts together on the Bad
Yeah,
Roman.
yeah. So I guess we'll kind of wrap it up with this. Reaching out to your community. I know you have this. Feel free to plug it in what your salsa stuff is. But reaching out to your community and just basic things. I've always said to folks, like, even if it's just crocheting and you end up going somewhere, you make a gift for somebody. If it's a cooking thing that you got, um, what's your thoughts of just getting involved in the community so that people are starting to prompt questions of like, why are you against holiday, or why are you against getting involved with politics? What's your philosophy or motto for how to start implementing that into community and starting and prompting those conversations? Do you have any tips or a little bit of a formula to follow?
Wow. With the salsa thing, it has provided me a lot of opportunity to speak with people one-on-one about, the Bad Roman, because we call it Bad Roman salsa. So I can say, it's connected to a podcast, it's connected to a project I've been working on. Then I can explain the project of what it's about no king but Christ, a very basic message of no king but Christ. But like you said, even crochet and this, if there, I don't even know if it's a skill that I have. It was a hobby that I started making salsa, and I would talk about it on Facebook. My friends saw it; they wanted to try the salsa. I figured out how to send them salsa. Then I taught myself how to can it, make it shelf stable, so now I can have a bunch on hand. And now I'm shipping it all across the country, and I'm doing these farmers markets and talking to people about it. The label's got our website on it. The label's got no king but Christ on it, so it generates a lot of questions,
Nice.
especially in this area. You talk about community. The community aspect to me is so important to me. I think it's something that I've really kind of geared our project towards a little bit more, other than just podcasting and other than just social media type stuff. I want to get out and talk to my neighbor. I want to get out and talk to people in my area. I live in a town outside of Memphis, and it's a more quote unquote conservative type area. So they seem really ripe for the conversation because the vast majority of them claim to be Christians.
Mm.
So they've already got this idea of who Jesus is. Now, when you start talking to them about no king but Christ, they could come up to my booth, and we've got the Jesus Anarchy symbol on our table throw.
Nice.
And I even had a guy come up because, what are you guys, a bunch of Christian anarchists? And I says, well, matter of fact, we are. And so it just starts a conversation, and it's been cool, man. It's been really cool to get to do this, to meet people specifically who they're ripe. They're there. They're it's just they're just missing one piece that they're not getting at their church. And that's where Craig comes in. I can provide them that piece. Keep going, because if you get back to Jesus, you recognize he is the one and only king that you need. Get out. And it was so cool leading into the political cycle, because I was doing farmers markets every month, and the people walking around with their Trump t-shirts on and stuff like that. But I get to talk to them about no king but Christ. Now, I'm not saying I convinced them that day, but they gave them something to talk about.
Right.
Now, I don't start beating people over the head when they come to the booth about it. I usually let them start the conversation because they get curious about the symbol. They get curious about the Bad Roman. What does that mean? That's my favorite part, is when they want to know what the Bad Roman means. Where did that name come from? I could get to describe that to them. It's generated a lot of really cool conversations.
Nice.
I haven't had any arguments yet out there at the farmers markets. They might look at me a little cross-eyed because they haven't heard some of this stuff before. But if anybody's wanting to do that, pick something you got. I mean, farmers markets are a great place to meet people. If you've got a skill, if you know how to, like you said, crochet, and I wouldn't know how to crochet, but there's all kinds of different vendors out there. I mean, people selling earrings. People make the pastor I was talking about, or the home church. He's got his own bees. He's a beekeeper. He sells his own honey. There's so many different things that you can do out there that if you know how to make something that is going to be something that people like to buy local stuff. They like to buy stuff like that instead of going to your big chain stores, staying out of Kroger, staying out of Walmart. They want to buy from farmers markets, even if it costs them a little bit more money. There's something about the local stuff. But if you got a skill, do it. and find you a local farmer's market. And if you've got a message of no king but Christ, you've got a message of getting folks back into Jesus, use that skill. It's something that God gave you. Use that skill that God gave you to promote the kingdom, to tell them about Jesus, to tell them about no king but Christ.
Right.
I love it, man. I love to get the conference. I'm a social butterfly by nature.
Same. I get in trouble for it.
When if somebody gets me going out at these farmers markets, I don't always have help out there. A lot of the times I'm by myself, but if I've got a coworker, sometimes she'll help me. I'll let her handle the booth, and I'll just step off and I'll just have a conversation with folks. And it's the best thing until they finally like, well, I got to go. I kind of wear them down a little bit. But it's too a lot of fun. Jesus. And it helps. Yeah, it's too much Jesus. I got a friend of mine who goes, man, I need some of that Jesus salsa.
I love it.
It's and it helps support the project. You were talking about earlier too about people tithing to churches and buildings and stuff.
Right.
We said from the outset with the Bad Roman that we're not trying to profit off of this. So I mean, my producer's not cheap. I pay her to kind of run things for me because I work a lot of hours on my own. So any kind of any profit that we might get off of it, we just give to charity. Nice. We give it to somebody else that needs it. I'm not trying to make this a full-time job. It was really kind of a hobby that's turned into a thing. But support your podcasters. If you're listening to Brandon,
support your local podcast.
You would be surprised if you would, like you said, if you get $2 or $3 a month, if you got 300 or 400 people doing that, you could support a show, something you believe in, something that you believe that's actually advancing the kingdom, other than sending your tithe to your pastor. I'm not against that either. If you feel led to do that, that's your thing. But you got podcasters out there that are spreading a message that people aren't hearing in their churches. So yeah, support
internationally.
Them. Yeah. I talk to people all across the world as well. That's another cool aspect of the project. You get to speak with. Have you ever talked to anybody in another country and you explain to them American Christianity and they look at you on the side of their eye like they have no idea what you're talking about?
I did a show with somebody. It's like, Christians, they don't know. He's like, this is obvious. What's going on in Palestine? I'm like, no, they don't. And he's like, how? I'm like, wow. But again, he's asking questions. A lot of times when I go on his show, he can't pronounce manna. But again, it's a word that's like, it's in the Bible. It means kind of bread. It's daily life, that bread of life. And it also, Revelation 2:17, I will reveal the hidden manna to him, So as we're talking about merch, folks, I'm wearing a nice shirt that was in memory of Craig. Governments are cigars. It's citizens the ashtrays. So feel free to buy some merch. So feel free to also now just plug in your stuff, and then we can wrap it up because I know you have to go to work as well, folks. If you can throw them $1 or $2, like I said, you guys literally are feeding the show. A lot of us do put our money where our mouth is. I cash in everything to do what I do. Yeah. So feel free to buy some of his salsa, and then maybe keep the jar and give it to somebody else for some kind of, preservative, and they'll prompt them to start digging into this stuff because our time is short, but the message is potent. And we really need to start connecting people to resources that are going to get them to start actually living Christ and not just reading about him. So, Craig, feel free to plug in your stuff, and we'll call it a wrap.
I appreciate you having me on the show. This has been a lot of fun. I like having conversations like this with folks who haven't understand what I'm saying. I don't get to do it a lot during the day, in my everyday life. So I appreciate you having me on and let me talk about our project to a whole new audience because this is my first time on your show. But the salsa, you can, if you want to help support the Bad Roman Project, if you like salsa, at the moment, I've got a mild, medium, hot, and a Cajun, and I just came up with an angry Cajun version that is really popular right now. I'm going to be doing a 6th version that's going to be, I'm going to call it consuming fire because it's going to be the hottest thing you've ever put in your mouth. Because I've had some people ask for a hotter version than my hot. My hot's pretty warm anyway. But I'm waiting on a friend of mine who's growing me some Carolina Reapers. He lives in California. He's growing me some peppers right now to make that salsa with. So nice. That hadn't happened yet. But if you want some salsa, it's a cool way to support the project. Email the badromansalsa@gmail.com. Or there's a Bad Roman Salsa Facebook page. You can message me there. As far as the podcast, go to thebadroman.com. You can find all of our episodes there. We have a blog that we kind of let go. We've been discussing trying to get going again, but just trying to get somebody to help with it has been another issue. You can find the podcast on any major platform. Wherever you listen to your podcast, just look up The Bad Roman. You're going to find it. And I think that's about it, man. Like I said, I appreciate you having me on and getting to do this. I look forward to speaking with you on my show.
Yeah.
Because I was new to your podcast, and our mutual friend Nathan messaged me, said you were curious and were interested in interviewing me on your show, and so I started looking at your stuff. It's new information to me. I think I've heard some of the stuff. It's a lot, at first, but I think if I listen more, I'll kind of be able to put the pieces together a little bit. But it's been interesting. I don't understand it all completely, but it's very interesting to me. It's got my attention. So
when we do our show, I'll make it very cookie cutter. So then when you hear all the other stuff, and again, it's a phrase that Christ said. And once you understand it as the core, you start going, I see the evil in the world. I understand how this is applicational. And it does connect into your community phenomenally.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, so do I. I like I said, I love your show. Guys, I cannot urge it enough. I really love his show. The intro, I'm literally doing like this, doing a little dance to the intro. It gets me excited. And that's, again, when you're doing fellowship, that's what it should do, is start excite you, saying, I'm ready to go back out for another round. I just filled my gas tank. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I didn't hear no bell. I didn't hear no bell, but I heard the trumpet. Christ is returning soon, folks. Thank you for tuning in again for another episode of the Manna Daily Podcast, available on Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube. And until next time, I will catch you on the next one.